we have a phenomenal panel that will excite and delight called Virtual Coffee Tables and TV App Graveyards. And in a nutshell, what we're going to talk about today is, Chuck Parker from the Second Screen Society was on the previous panel, and he made a comment that he's tracking over 100 second screen apps. And by the way, he's only paying attention to the ones he thinks are possibly viable. So there's a lot out there. And actually, my co-founder is the one who I first heard the term of the virtual coffee table, being his iPad sitting on his coffee table with just tons of things all have to do with TV. So we've got a great panel here of people who have actually built some of these apps, probably some of the ones that are in the virtual graveyard and some of the ones that are some of the hot ones that people are using minute by minute. So we'll hear some of those wins and losses, what to do right, what to not do. We might prognosticate on some of the bigger players in the space and what we think they're up to. I'm Jeremy Toman. I'm CEO of a company called Digit. We make an app called Next Guide. We are a TV discovery application designed to help consumers find shows to watch on live TV as well as streaming services. We have social features and a bunch of other cool things, and you can download it in the App Store. It's called Next Guide. And I've been in the space for a long time with companies like Sling Media, Boxy, Clicker, Voodoo, and a bunch of others. And with me, I'm going to let the panel each introduce themselves, starting with you, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Katz, here from home in San Francisco. I work at a company called WatchWith. And WatchWith is a metadata creation and syndication platform. So rather than being a direct-to-consumer app, it creates timelines that power a lot of the apps that you see around television shows and networks and events.
My name is Colin Decker. I'm Vice President of Audience Development for Revision 3, which is a Discovery Communications company. I oversee all audience development across our digital businesses. So it's Discovery Digital Media. It's not what's on TV, but actually online. The portfolio consists of mostly offshoots of the linear channels of Discovery, combined with the newly acquired Revision 3, which is strictly an online internet TV play, as well as other properties such as Treehugger and HowStuffWorks.com. So we spend a lot of time thinking about audience engagement, both from the perspective of driving tune-in to the linear broadcast, but frankly, more importantly, downstream into the future, looking at how do we grow, retain, and engage audiences in the digital space as we view that as pretty much the future.
Hi, I'm Randy Shiozaki. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called TV Plus. We were founded in 2009, so relatively early in this sort of second screen cycle. And we're largely providing the tools and technology to the major networks to power a lot of these second screen experiences. So we work with companies like Viacom and Discovery and Univision and Fox and CBS and others to power the applications that they're bringing to market for these co-viewing experiences. So what am I doing while I'm watching the show on the second screen?
So thanks, guys. So Randy, I just want to start with you. So you have an app on the market, but that's clearly not the focus of the company.
That's right.
What did you learn there? Was that a pivot? Was that the strategy all along? Or, I'm not asking for the spin version, but just something about why is that not the focus of the company at this point?
Yeah, so when we started the company, we put our very first activation in 2009 was with Fox Home Entertainment around a movie called Night at the Museum. So we've always had that sort of behind-the-scenes, powered-by approach. That said, we did have an app, and we do have an app in the market. And we very fundamentally believe that without having those touch points with the consumers, you really can't build a good platform. You really can't build good tools. So to answer your question, what did we learn from that? We learned a lot. We learned a lot about what is the nature of content on the second screen that drives engagement? What keeps somebody in a show for longer than the average viewing of that show? What types of content work relative to the types of content that they're watching? So how do sitcoms perform versus dramas versus sports versus other categories? So there's a lot of learnings that we got from that. And I think some of them are pretty clear now, right? Sitcoms are difficult, dramas are difficult, sports, reality, news are really hot categories for this. But it was a really good learning experience for us.
Great. Now, Jeff, you guys have always been the white label space. A platform, I guess, is the better phrase.
It is. I think we're at a point where media in general, whether it's feature films or TV, is evolving to the point and where, in addition to the picture and the sound that plays out as programming is delivered to consumers, we're kind of having a hypothesis that there's a third track, and that third track is the related content and events around that show, and specifically the ones that are created by, owned, controlled, and monetized by the people that either make or have the distribution rights to those shows. And so, the world that we see right now in 2012 was a world where there were a lot of very early direct-to-consumer, network-branded or show-branded apps to just try and basically use marketing. Every time you open up the trade press, right, there's a Shark Week app, tune into Shark Week. And, it's important, right? And I do think Randy's company was involved with that. But I think as we go into 2013 and into 2014 and 2015, there's a bigger opportunity to turn that parallel timeline.
There's nothing bigger than Shark Week. Let's be
There's-
very clear
That's
about
right.
this.
Trust me, there's nothing bigger than Shark Week.
Especially up in Humboldt yesterday.
Right.
To turn this into a real business. And the business isn't just going to be to deliver related content to a single app. Mm-hmm. It's really going to be to syndicate related content out to all the places where that video might live, or to the companion experiences that might be able to add value. And so we're kind of making a bet on metadata syndication as a platform rather than a white label app solution with a CMS.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, Colin, audience development.
Mm-hmm. What is it?
Yeah.
Sure. So I've got, in my background, I've spent some time building sort of second screen apps or apps that sort of engage in a conversational manner, social parameters against television. In my current role, I oversee audience development. Audience development specifically has to do with growing digital audiences and understanding that those audiences, or really rather that programming for that space is a conversation with the audience. In other words, for example, with Discovery Communications is a titanic force in cable television, pretty much saturated in the United States. We've got many hit channels. Everybody knows the brands. And to date, with things like the Shark Week app, which is a great app, we've pushed some of that content over digital channels and engaged audiences there. But truth be told, it's really more about figuring out how we can get more, sort of dogs to eat the dog food kind of thing. I mean, it is still pretty much considered a marketing channel, right? So audience development on the inverse side of this is looking more from the perspective of if we create original content or new businesses across these digital channels, it's different. You don't just make a show with a well-known host and then think of all these channels as promotion. It's in fact a conversation between the two. So there actually involves a great deal of listening, involves a great deal of editorial. It's not marketing, in other words, to put a fine point on it.
And fundamentally, in 2012, is it still about driving people to watch the stuff on live TV?
Right.
Is that priority number one, and then there's priority number 7, and that's kind of it, or how's that work?
I mean, I think there's a couple of really interesting answers there. I can tell you that from Discovery Digital Media perspective, we're growing an entirely new audience off the TV, right? Of course, there's a lot of our efforts are about building those brands and extending them wherever possible because things like Shark Week are just so insanely popular. Yeah. But the truth is I think that from the second screen perspective, there's actually a more interesting conversation around, there's live TV. There's so much, as you pointed out, there's so much potential there, and there's so much attraction there to hitting sports, news, politics, big events, Oscars. Things like Twitter are extremely dominant, for example, in terms of that conversation. I think what's interesting for a company like Discovery Communications, which does none of those things, is how to own the conversation on sort of asynchronous viewing and, and create more, conversation around things that have multiple ongoing lives in library, right? Because all of our stuff's evergreen.
But in 2012, priority is live TV.
I can't speak for Discovery Communications. I can tell you that,
Is your opinion as a
media
media guy that most networks are currently prioritizing?
Like my opinion is this. Most networks are tightening the noose around their neck right now in a big way because the operators have retrenched. Authentication is going to be the play. A year and a half ago, we thought, maybe, this won't work. And maybe, Netflix is going to shatter this down. I mean, I can tell you the operators feel like they're winning it right now with authentication, and all the networks are saying, okay, let's not panic, let's just keep supporting this. The problem is there's no incremental growth to be had other than basically suffocating the consumer and or driving up ratings. So, I mean, literally, there's a lot of programming people at various networks, in my opinion, who are right now literally saying to themselves, okay, how can I get the biggest rating share of all time in all history? I mean,
Cosby Show.
Unprecedented. Exactly. We need to get Cosby, right?
All right, great. So I'm going to keep on the Shark Week theme just because it's such low-hanging fruit. So Randy, you guys built that, right?
We powered it. Yeah, Discovery built it, and there was an agency involved.
Okay. Tell us about that process really quick. Just educate us on, you've got a platform, you've got generic to TV Plus, but just how does an app like that come together? And then we'll talk a bit about the aftermath.
Yeah, so the aftermath. At a high level, we're still at a stage where there's a lot of variance in the networks, in their organizations, and their structures, and how they think about approaching this. Some are much further along. Some are really just dabbling. This is their first year of doing anything in second screen. For this process with Shark Week, I think there's a couple things to point out that are interesting. One is that this was delivered as an element or a component of the Discovery HD app. This was not a Shark Week app. Last year that was the case. This year they decided to roll this into the network-wide app. And I think that's a trend that we're seeing, is that they're trying to aggregate, educate, and build these audiences inside of the network-wide app as opposed to having individual show apps. Now, that's not to say that those apps don't still exist. They do. And for some of the top shows, we're powering the X Factor app starting today. And that's a standalone app. There's a lot of money and sponsorship behind it. It made sense for that, and that was a requirement of the sponsor. But largely, we're seeing a trend towards these network-specific apps.
So the Shark Week app that's out there is basically the Shark Week 2012 app.
No, this was the Discovery HD.
The current, what's out there for people right now? For the fans of Shark Week, what did they download?
They downloaded the Discovery app, the mothership app, the Discovery HD parent app.
Published an update, I believe, to it, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And in years before, had there been a dedicated
There had been
Shark
a dedicated Shark Week app. That's
so
right.
that app's now in what we'll call the virtual graveyard.
Yes.
It doesn't have, in other words, it doesn't have utility. Shark Week 2011 on my iPad isn't going to do too much, maybe some clips or whatever.
What everybody's finding is it's very hard to acquire and build an audience for a standalone show app, sort of out of the gate, and to have people there. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for most programming.
Apparently Gossip Girl's got it pretty nailed.
Yeah, there are some outlier examples.
Okay.
That would be one of them.
So, and where does the agency come in to play? In other words, you guys don't actually build the creative, et cetera. That's a third party?
That's right. So that varies as well. So typically there's an agency involved, and the agency is doing the design on the standards of the brand standards of the network. They're closely involved in that part of defining the experience. In some cases, there's an internal group. So we're often working with internal development resources within the network groups who are going through and they're doing the actual development or programming. We're also seeing a trend towards really building, platforms within a platform in a sense, right? Or platforms on top of a platform that will then work and enable the network. There was a point earlier in the last session about how expensive these apps are. They're still extremely expensive to build and develop, and that is a barrier. Until the monetization is there, it's very hard to justify spending this much money. So we're really focused on driving down those costs. I think the networks are largely focused on driving down those costs and building standardized aspects of the platform that can be reused over and over again.
Okay. So building on that, so Jeff, I can have the Discovery app. Now Comcast wants me to have the Xfinity app. And now we have GetGlue, Miso, ZBox, and Vigil, and a host of others. For both you and Randy, it's you're happy to have your tools and content in those kind of apps. And while Shark Week as a dedicated app is no longer a thing, there are plenty of shows. There's a Game of Thrones app. There's plenty of shows that are show-specific apps. Is there enough point, or are we still just at the precipice of this getting bigger?
Well, I do think it's an evolution. The affinities that consumers have with programming sometimes is at the individual show brand level. Less often, I think, actually at the network level. But for something like Discovery, right, where you have kids or you care about educational TV, that it can be really compelling. Or Bravo, that has a really dedicated audience. And I do think the trend right now is to step up from individual shows, except for the biggest shows, that can promote on air and drive download to network apps. But there's another tier, and it's a tier that NextGuide is potentially competing with, as well as folks like GetGlue or ZBox, people that are trying to be a pan TV experience and try and differentiate and add value to that experience by doing a better job with the layout or the graphics. And we think there's an opportunity to plug in time-based related content when you get to an individual show that you are actually watching. ZBox, does anybody here work at ZBox? ZBox is an amazing aggregation and integration of publicly available services. The value that they've added is just in bringing, TMS data or Rovi data or Twitter or Facebook into a common interface. And you could argue whether they do a good job or not on it. But at the end of the day, it's not that differentiated of an experience other than you get to find a show that you want to watch. You had talked about anecdotes. My San Francisco Giants, who are having their World Series parade right now while I'm in Los Angeles, on, what was the night? Sunday night?
Sunday night.
So it went into the 10th inning. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, talking about the Giants. I was like, I wonder what's going on ZBox. And I opened the ZBox app, and because the show had gone into the 8:30 time slot, the World Series had disappeared from ZBox. And it was really...
Was it Heidi?
No, it was like they had a special on the weather.
Nobody gets the Heidi reference.
No, nobody gets it.
Anyone get the Heidi reference?
No.
Nobody. Mm-hmm. Well, so it was a Super Bowl, right? What's that? Famous, basically NBC switched over to broadcasting.
Oh, really?
In a intense sports
moment. So, for me, it was just an illustration of, how that aggregation of these web services might not be enough. This idea that you're driving real-time conversation, I think, is huge around television. And you know what? Twitter won, right? There's no new app that's going to be downloaded that's going to be used. I mean, no matter whether you put a hashtag in your show or not, people are talking about your show on Twitter right now.
So let's pause on that. So first, let audience poll. How many people here have a TV app on their iPad? How many people have iPads? Okay, good. How many of you have an app, one or more on your iPad? Five or more?
Around TV?
Around TV. 5 or more? 10 or more? 20? Wow, all right. That's the two guys who cover the space. All right.
Yeah, exactly what I'm counting.
That's fair.
Is that Chuck Parker?
That's Chuck Parker. And you have what? How many do you have on your iPad, Chuck? Installed right now? 40 to 50. So, okay, of the people who had, let's call it 5 or more, how many of them use them regularly while watching TV? Other than Chuck. Chuck, you're exempt from all future questions. Chuck Parker runs the Second Screen Society, and he does this for a living. How many people here have tweeted about a TV show while watching a TV show that wasn't sports? Okay. You take the sports element out, it changed it a lot. How many people have done a Facebook update about a show while watching a show that wasn't sports? Okay. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that, in general, Facebook is considered to be massively overwhelming Twitter as far as volume of social conversations about TV.
Right.
But we can't capture the data because it's off in Facebook land and their thing. You're a big. I'm not a big Twitter proponent at all. That's my
no. I mean, it's like an unstoppable force that's out there, and they're the guys at Social Guide or the Bluefin people, Trender. They're doing a good job at tracking that discussion. We have seen, like with The Voice that Watch With is powering right now. It's on NBC.com. It's on the Voice Facebook fan page, and it's the same experience is pushed into ZBox right now. And by and far, the most interaction around the show is happening on the Facebook fan page right now.
And how many interactions on a typical episode of The Voice?
We can see what do they call it, non-personally identifiable, IP address access. So the aggregate going into Facebook is probably 100 times more than we're seeing from just regular IP aggregation. But you know what? They're not super promoting it on the air. And I do think the networks and the show producers really have the opportunity. They've got their foot right next to the gas pedal. When they do on-air snipes, when there are calls to actions to download the app or to get involved with the show in some other way, we absolutely see traffic to that stuff spike. And so, I'm anticipating that at some point the Comcast investment in Z-Box will start to show up in, Christina's lap on The Voice where she's, tweeting along in Z-Box. But to date, hasn't happened yet.
We're all kind of wondering why it hasn't happened yet. Guys, comments on this topic? On Twitter, Facebook,
one thing that we see very consistently across the board is that there's a massive drop-off in Twitter activity, in-app or out-of-app, as you go from the East Coast to the West. I mean, it's an absolute cliff. And the percentage of activity on the West Coast is, it's not insignificant, but it's almost insignificant relative to what happens on the East Coast. So I think there are core aspects of the Twitter platform.
Not on Tuesday.
What's that?
Not on Tuesday.
Not on Tuesday.
Too soon still?
Well, more people live in the Eastern time zone, so
that's part of it. But then there's also there's the spoiler problem, which we've talked about, and then there's just the kind of social capital, right, which is that everything cool has already been said. So why am I going to go say it? So I think there's some really, really endemic problems with the platform that make it tough for this.
It's interesting. One conversation that comes up a lot is, and I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, so I'll draw it out a little more, that TV is TV, right? Like we're very quick to sort of just call it TV, but obviously the difference between, live news, anything live, sport, or anything that's sort of timely to within a few hours is, frankly, in my world, is utterly distinct and separate, right, from entertainment. And entertainment is quickly going deep into subscription VOD as a primary point of consumption for a lot of people. It's funny, at Revision 3, we're a company that has about 75 people. I'd say half those people are under the age of 25. We have a lot of young sort of social media people, and we have a great team. It's tough. I have to sort of break it to, some of our larger corporate parents that a lot of our employees don't have cable and never will.
Do you think that's true?
Absolutely true.
So 10 years from now, those same people have had their first or second kid.
For 25,
they're coming home from their jobs.
Well,
which
exactly.
aren't nearly as cool as their current job.
Exactly, and by that time frame, my guess is that we'll all be beaming space bucks to Comcast. We won't know what that is, but that's how we get TV in our eyeballs, right? Because that's essentially what it's going to be, right? So
right. Let's pretend the space bucks part doesn't happen.
Right.
Let's. It's a bit of a diversion. I don't want to go too far. Do you think that we're a decade away from a massive drop-off in escapism as TV? Or TV as escapism?
By escapism, you mean like entertainment? Sort of, or...
Well, I don't... Look, I'm in the late 30s, got some kids. When I go home to TV, the last thing I want to do is spend time navigating menus and choosing stuff. I want stuff to play, and hopefully it's not involving reality. And
I think the change that you're going to see in terms of what those TV products are is already happening, which is obviously there's a huge advertiser flight to live and to event, right? And I think you're going to see entertainment, and particularly premium serial entertainment. Think of AMC, think of HBO. Is going to continue to be driven into that sort of SVOD or subscription VOD space, that just sort of highly on-demand experience, because that stuff is being so heavily time-shifted at this point. There's a dirty secret in Nielsen somewhere, right? The value is just plummeting right now for that space. However, it's growing an entirely new one. So I do think the future of TV is going to look very different, and it is, frankly, if we want to think of TV the way it is today in terms of how it's consumed through the box, in the living room, it's going to become much more about events, live, anything that they can really monetize in that old way. And I think a lot of this entertainment stuff is going to migrate into these other spaces.
I think we're in like a golden age of television storytelling right now, and not only is time shifting affecting it, it's this binge TV idea, right? Like I haven't watched the last 8 episodes of Breaking Bad yet, and I will, and I'll look forward to it.
Everybody dies.
It doesn't end like happily. I really look forward to it. Same thing with shows like Homeland, which somebody on the last panel almost gave up some spoilers. And, this idea that you're not watching it in real time, but it's so engaging, like Game of Thrones, right, the most expensive TV show ever made, that you really would want to go deeper into it. And maybe not just in a, librarian or researcher mode, but this opportunity to tell stories in new ways. And, Brandon and Stephen and Chuck talked about this a little in the last panel, like what we've seen so far in the kind of companion app spaces, and it may be why it has or hasn't become radically adopted by consumers, is really a very kind of like, researcher, intellectual point of view. Like, did you know Stephen Colbert was born in North Carolina in 1962? It's like, that doesn't make the show funnier, right? And a link to a Wikipedia page from inside of ZBox for the California mortgage crisis that randomly shows up while you're watching The Voice. And so, like, automation only does a certain amount. I think the curation around social and then actually pushing upstream to get these tools in the hands of the content creators is where it starts to be interesting. Stephen mentioned that Grace Note was part of this Sci-Fi Network app for Face Off, and they were part. They're the part that recognizes the show and returns the media ID. But as Randy pointed out, there was a development company, there's the Watch With platform powering it. But these guys went, to the original production sets and created exclusive content that's only available in the sync to broadcast. And it's available first in that sync to broadcast experience. Later, it may show up on their website. But the idea that the creators and storytellers will start to get the opportunity to dimensionalize stories so that not only do you watch the 8 or 10 hour run, but if you're a super fan, and it's not going to be for everybody, that you really can experience more about the characters, about the story, potentially, and I think maybe it was Chuck that had said there's a new cop show that starts to show some backstory and things that are not necessarily tangential, but you could watch the show and not miss it. But if you were a real fan, you could actually go deeper. I think there's an opportunity to go back to Law and Order and actually have a second screen app that is from the perspective of the victim that dies in the first 15 seconds of every episode. There's 20 years worth of content there to be created.
No Lenny Briscoe, no Law and Order. Sure, why not?
What about fantasy football apps?
Fantasy football apps. We can go into this. I think it's a safe statement that sports is the holy grail of second screen experiences. If you think of it this way, is when you watch live sports today, most sports broadcasts, there's few exceptions, when you're watching on high def, right, which is now basically the bulk of this country at least, you still see the stats on the 4x3 safe area, not on the outer edge, right? And nothing useful happening on the outer edge, as if it's just a bit more grass on the field, and that's all you're allowed to see.
Cheerleaders.
Yeah, and so I think the second screen is such an obvious place to have all the stats and the instant replays and the smack talk and all these things. We can dive in, but to me, it's one of those a lot of people make a lot of money and you should be in that space if you're not doing anything else.
It's a gamification experience around sports. If some of you may remember, 10 or more years ago, the Hollywood Stock Exchange, right, where there was
still playing.
There was an online, fantasy Hollywood league, and it could be a compelling thing for an all TV app like Next Guide, for example, to have leaderboards and pick your stars at the beginning of the season and see who rises to the top.
I'll make one comment. So we would argue that largely the second screen has been solved for sports. Not to say that there aren't other things you can do, but we've looked into it pretty extensively, and there's strong affinity for certain platforms, right? You have Yahoo Sports guys, or CBS Sports guys, or ESPN Sports guys, and they already know how to navigate those destinations to get that. So whenever we see applications kind of reinventing or repackaging stats to deliver, I don't know that that adds a lot of value. That said, we're working on...
We can license the data at this point, throw it in our app easily.
Yeah. That said, we're doing something interesting with a sports league right now where they're actually trying to reach a new audience. So they've dumbed it down in essence, right? So they're taking a different spin on the second screen to engage a segment of the audience that they don't normally reach with some light gameplay, some light interaction. It isn't about the deep, heavy fantasy aspects or the deep sports piece.
I'll tell you what I do on sports. I want a new version of Madden that when you're watching a game, like recreates that moment of the game and you can be the quarterback. Like I think that'd be awesome. Right? Like, how far away are we from that though? That's a year, 2? Like we're at that point where all these kind of things could happen, and it'll be your face on the quarterback.
There's one thing, if I could add.
Sure.
To that point, we talk about a lot of stuff here, but the reality is television is complicated, right? It is. It's complicated. It's extraordinarily complicated, but for the consumer, it's not, right? You push a button, and it always, generally speaking, it always works. With regard to these experiences and where all of this is headed, it's taken some time to get here, but the second screen isn't quite there yet, right? So all of the things that we can dream up, we're 3.5 years into our business, and a lot of our clients are still pushing trivia and polls, right? Like that's as far as we've gotten. We're starting to see, and I think what 2013 is going to bring is there's been so much maturity in the technology in terms of thinking through things like shows rolling over and commercial breaks that change for syndicated content. There's a whole host of things that have to be solved for. Not all of that, but a lot of that has been solved for. I think we're going to get to a point where then you can really take the technology and do some cool stuff.
Sure. So,
go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question.
With regard to the cost of developing apps, I've often heard that apps generally are good for super fans, whereas for the general viewer, perhaps the browser is the way to go. I don't know if any of you would want to comment on that or agree with that or disagree.
I would be interested to ask what the goal is. Do you know what I mean? Frankly, I think it's something you probably contend with a little bit is there's a little bit of rush to, hey, we need an app, we got to create an app. Should it be about our network? Should it be about the show or the channel or the hosts or something like that? But there's a little bit of a pullback. What's the goal? Are you trying to drive additional tune-in? Are you trying to drive and monetize deeper engagement? By the way, the monetize piece, that's going to be tough, right? So do you...
Yeah. Just a thought. Yeah, I agree. But just a thought to add to that. From our vantage point, what we see, we take the perspective that this is still a growing and emerging space, and don't put any barriers in place to give somebody a chance to have one of these experiences. And so how that renders itself practically is we tend to deploy these things on the web as well as within apps. But to your point, here's what we see. The engagement times for people who are using the dedicated app are 5 to 6 times what they are for people who use it on the web. But more people are using it on the web than are using it within the apps, right? So there's some of that accidental discovery, maybe a little more casual, have more places to go. Clearly the superfans are inside the app, and the engagement times, I think, bear that out.
So let's. I want to come back to kind of the original topic and take it in a little bit different direction. So first, the straightforward question. Do you guys envision that the next few years of TV is app graveyards? People will download, use, discard. Download, use, discard. Do you think we will get loyal platforms and then make a couple of bets? And I want to cast this a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
And then am I going to be more likely to have a Z-Box and a Discovery, a Z-Box or a Discovery, or ABC or Fox, wherever you want to put it there? Or is it a Z-Box and a Discovery and a Planet Earth app?
Well, good question, Jeremy.
Thank you. That's my job. Answer now.
Colin had mentioned authentication and TV everywhere. I mean, the idea that there's a companion app that doesn't actually deliver the actual show seems kind of like a very temporary thing. Yeah. I mean, we saw companion apps in 2003 and 2004. Microsoft had Windows XP Media Center. You could pipe your cable in the back, and you could do an HTML overlay, and people built sync-to-broadcast apps. I think the tendency right now is really like with HBO Go to be able to see the show, and at any time, or with Amazon's Kindle Fire HD with their X-ray for movies feature. People just expect there to be, more data, something other than just the show that's there. And until it becomes ubiquitous, I think we're going to have these little spikes and blips and experiments. But I do think over the next few years, just like the places that we go, the people that we meet, the products that we buy are all surrounded by a halo of data, why would the film and television programming and commercials that we experience be any different? And so I think there's a radical evolution of what these apps are. I would imagine that I could continue to pay Netflix or continue to pay Hulu or continue to pay Comcast, and that I'll get all the shows and all this extra stuff, that it won't necessarily need to have a bunch of different apps.
It's actually, just to add one comment, when we were naming our app, which we called Next Guide, we had, whiteboard craziness, but we almost instantly eliminated using the word TV to describe our app. And the reason being, we didn't want people to come and download it, even though it's a guide to TV, it is a TV guide. We didn't want people to download it and think, oh, by using this app, I'll get all these TV shows that I want to watch, right? Which we believe fundamentally consumers are now trained to think that if they hear that this is the blank TV app, that means they're going to watch the TV on it. So back to the original question, am I going to have, in the years to come, more superfan apps, more network-wide apps, and more generic apps?
I think there is already a graveyard, right? I've got tons of video apps that I've opened once. Curiously, though, I don't know if anybody's shared this experience. There's only a few odd and frankly kind of crappy apps that I use almost daily. NBC News. Why? Because they actually post it the second it's aired. Video is terrible. The interface is weak, in my opinion. But it's there, right? So, that's interesting, right?
And that's an NBC News app, not the NBC To Go app.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't know what their politics are there, but, that's how it seems to have happened. But, I think you're going to see that app graveyard. I think you're going to continue to see that. There is kind of an interesting confluence between the ease of deployment of these apps. There's so many. We're headed to a place where, very soon. My son's 7. I'm guessing he's going to make his own app next year, right? Which could have upside. That might collide with sort of the lack of demand, right? Like, it's going to become incredibly easy to do these kinds of things in a sort of promotional stunt capacity, but they're just maybe ever decreasing demand as a few key aggregators push forward. Who knows? In a year, we really might see people just saying, no, Xfinity takes care of everything for me, and I already pay these guys. Done. I don't know.
So I think from our perspective, we're bullish on a few things. We're pretty bullish on the network apps. I think there's going to be. I think every network is going to have an app. Those apps will contain all of the video content authenticated. They'll contain all of the related content. They'll contain their own sort of, walled garden discovery tools. Like that will happen, right? So it's been fragmented, politics or otherwise, right? These things have been fragmented. That's all going to come together in a nice, tidy package. So I'll have a Fox app, I'll have a CBS app, I'll have whatever. We're also very bullish for the MVPDs because we think they're in a really interesting position here because they have the ability, with the help of others, to handle discovery across networks, obviously. They have TV over a piece, and they are going to consume a subset of the content of this related experiences that are being created by the networks. That's how we see this playing out. So I think it will be a lot easier for the consumer to be able to discover these applications, and I think it will be managed kind of on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think it's going to be very hard for a consumer to navigate between these things. Sure. And I think there is a role for the sort of pure third-party horizontal play. Whether that's anchored by a guide or by a social experience or by whatever it might be, I think there's absolutely a role for those guys to play. And they'll largely support, I think, the ecosystem of the content creators.
Thank you for not dooming me.
I didn't.
Actually, it's funny, when we look at the MVPDs, we think that they have a role to play, but we actually don't believe they can own the social or taste profile of the consumer. And our perspective is this: it doesn't matter who you're loyal to, Comcast, DirecTV, Dish. At the end of the day, your social graph, by definition, must span beyond the same people who use the same provider. So if I'm on DirecTV and Colin's on Comcast and Randy's on Dish, and we all like a good ABC show, that show will unite us much far beyond our networks. But similarly, We also don't believe that a network can ultimately own the social or taste profile either, for the exact same reason that we all might have 3 completely different things in common, which are on 3 different networks. So, and that's part of the point of our existence. I want to go back to where you guys just were a second ago. So ZBox has been brought up. I'll bring up 3 others. So ZBox, GetGlue, Miso, and Viggle. We'll call those the 4 horsemen of social TV.
No Shazam?
Have you tried it?
Not yet. Maybe one
On
day.
TV? Has anybody tried Shazam on TV?
Everybody tried it during the Super Bowl, but nobody can get it up in time.
Yeah, you fumble it. Yeah. No, they have a broad TV offering now.
It works for all of TV
That's
now.
starting to roll
All right,
out.
let's add them in.
Yeah.
All right, so now we've got Shazam, Viggle, Miso, GetGlue, and ZBox. And I'll
Connect TV. I
No.
see commercials all the time.
I'm going to skip that.
Yeah.
My question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can add and modify.
I defer.
You know, if I'm in a world where I'm getting my content from Netflix and ABC and Xfinity apps, and those guys are all possessing me. We're in a world where discovery is suited by, not your discovery, but content discovery is served by independent apps like mine, as well as those apps themselves. You know, these are all fundamentally, as far as I'm concerned, they are the drive people to watch a live version of a show, and that is the entire purpose of their existence, which, as both of you have asserted, and I'm assuming you agree, is not necessarily the future of TV watching, at least not for scripted content. Maybe a lot more reality, a lot more sports, a lot more live, but scripted content seems to be heading down the path of catch-up and binge viewing. So, do any of these 5 make it on their own in this current world, or in that world to be?
Well, I mean, to me, Viggle's a feature, and it's a feature around loyalty and points. And so I think those features could be integrated into other apps. Miso had a moment where they were able to generate social discussion and actually content, but it's actually after the fact. There's something there for user-generated content around shows. Craig Palmer at Wikia is building a huge business around user-generated content around TV and movies. Shazam right now, you know, is back in that box with ZBox where, yeah, they can identify the TV show, but there's nothing else there. And, you know, maybe Into Now would have been on this list a year ago. The kind of fundamental magic trick that they're able to do where you have your device listen and it actually recognizes you're watching the 5:30 a.m. local news. I mean, it's like, wow, but they've never delivered on the next page of that. So I think, you know, each one of these things are experiments that have pushed a little bit towards what a complete user experience is. GetGlue, check in, tell your friends. Then?
Stickers.
So each one is kind of knocked off a very simple thing that in aggregate might be what the television experience is a few years from now, but I don't think that any one of them will necessarily be around. Then again, you know, there's Ford trucks and Chevy trucks and Ram trucks, and this is America, and people have their affinity to the things that they like. So market will tell.
Colin?
I think they're all gone. I think they're all gone, and I think the only things that will really persist in this space will be things that demonstrate undeniable utility and things that provide real content. And by content, I don't even mean video. In other words, so many of these social channels like Twitter are viewed as marketing for the networks. Like, how do I get somebody to, go back here? I think what they miss is that that's actually the opportunity to build actual audience there by giving them actual content, by which I mean, reading a tweet from, Discovery Corporate Communications promoting a show is a very different experience than reading a tweet by Steve Martin.
Or
right?
a shark.
Well, or a shark with a personality.
Yeah.
Or a shark with lasers.
Right, which would be, awesome. And I would actually be like, I kind of want to check that feed every now and then because it's really funny and engaging.
Randy, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't know who exists necessarily, but I would say this. There's something really interesting about Twitter, and I'll make the point, that it was adopted in part because people were using it, right? But it was also adopted because Twitter's a third-party platform where the network can promote a hashtag and sort of wash their hands of the crazy stuff that gets said, right? And they don't have to be responsible for that. And those are real conversations. I've been in meetings with labor relations, right, about where this stuff lives and how it exists. Like, there are real limitations as to what a content owner or Comcast or whoever can do with this content. It remains to be seen whether or not that's going to be enough, or if one of these third parties, the Intune Now is a good example, inside of Yahoo or not, this whole thing, the cap-it thing, right? So it works really well, right? Now, is that legal? It's not my area.
It's only
right?
live and it lasts for like 10 days.
Right.
And then it's gone.
Right.
So it's,
but it's a feature that you might not have seen come out of somewhere else, right? And so at the very least, it's an opportunity for us to learn and see what is working. But I think there's a strong case to be made that once the content and the monetization starts flowing between these applications, is an area where Jeff and I agree, amongst others, I'm sure, that we don't have to be in a world where there's one app that rules them all. I think this space will continue to be heavily fragmented for a long time.
I agree with that.
Anything else from the audience? I'll keep going otherwise. All right, Vink, if you come up with something, I'll come back to you in a couple minutes. So let's tackle two more entrenched players and see where we think they're going to be in a few years.
Sure.
I think everybody probably, I'm guessing this entire, how many people here are Netflix streaming subscribers? How many people are Hulu Plus streaming subscribers? It's barely represented.
How many people here realize that they're subscribing to these things but forgot that they're being billed for it?
That was actually pretty demographically representative right there. Now, in a world where I have, at this point, it's 54 apps that exist from the variety of content providers that I could download to get content. So 54 apps include ABC to Go, HBO Go, Fox Go, etc. Most of the content that you can find in a Netflix or a Hulu is out there somewhere. Not all of it, and there are entire shows that are locked into those providers. It seems like the world is going down the place where my ABC Go will have more and more content, more and more archives, more and more close to real-time stuff, and et cetera. How do you guys think those two companies fare in the next few years?
Sorry, Netflix and
Hulu.
And Hulu specifically.
And they're not really strictly second screen providers, but I mean, the number one video consumption on an iPad is Netflix, and they are, beyond, after YouTube, the number one.
Well, I read that Netflix was going to be bought by Microsoft just on Friday.
It's got to be true. It happened in the blog.
Yeah.
Well, look, I do think that there's an evolution from channels, and the apps thing may be complete. You might be perfectly happy having ABC, Fox, CBS, and NBC app and be able to have deep archives from those. Whether they monetize them with ads, probably, versus subscription is another story. But it's really the rights and licensing that Hulu does. Like for me, Hulu's my DVR. I'm one of the cord cutter people. I miss the Saturday Night Live. I watch it the next day on Hulu. It's no big deal. It's less commercials, actually. It's pretty nice. But what you're seeing, like from Netflix, right, isn't just repeats, as Brian Roberts said. They're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in original programming. I mean, any Arrested Development fans in the audience, right? I'm going to keep paying Netflix to get Arrested Development, and it's
Do you think they'll have a surge that week?
Yeah, probably. Well, I think they're doing the binge thing, maybe, or they are with House of Cards.
Do you think they'll have a surge in subscribers? Do you think people will?
Yeah, I think so.
How many people here would sign up to Netflix just to watch the new Arrested Development season?
I mean, it's $8. I mean, like, that's crazy, right? There's episodes on iTunes that are $8.
So what I'm saying is the differentiator won't just be back catalog or even licensed for a new window, like a Hulu window. It'll actually be investment on original programming. Amazon, right? I mean, who knew that if you pay for Amazon Prime, you get all this Amazon TV? Done the most horrible job marketing that to consumers. Mm-hmm. And yet, they're creating original programming channels. They have people in Sherman Oaks that are greenlighting television shows. Over the next few years, I think, it won't be that everything's available everywhere. The broadcast may become the AM radio of media. It's on in the background. It's there if there's an emergency, but you never really want to listen to it. And so I do think
you're bullish on that.
I am bullish on those guys.
I'm bullish on Netflix. I think they need to stick to their knitting a little bit. I think their originals thing is really smart. I think their audiences, entertainment is just pouring into that space. And as soon as more value-conscious consumers get out there with, actual broadband, some of those more broadband households get added and you get more value-conscious, consumers, and it comes with their TV at this point. I mean, even if they're terrible apps, it does function. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty easy sell. I think that there's a big future there. I think Hulu is a little bit of a different story. in my opinion, it's, to me, it's a very simple thing. Why is Hulu not 25 million subscribers at this point? Hulu Plus, right? And, I think from my perspective is this. I was privileged, I was sort of privy to some consumer research about a year and a half ago that looked, not with Discovery Communications, a different company, that looked very closely at the question of cord cutting, about, consumption habits, about likely early adopters, what would they potentially do. And one of the interesting pieces of feedback we got across the board was they didn't like Hulu because of the ads. And they felt that the ads were, in fact, we kept getting feedback that people said, we think there's actually more ads than normal. Because some people, when they get hit with that same ad that is not being dynamically served, they're kind of like, hey, what the heck? So I see rocky seas ahead for Hulu. I think the conspicuous omission of certain networks will be problematic. Yeah. It's never going to be the MVPD of the future. The ads are a little heavy-handed, particularly for subscription. And, I think you're going to see there's a really tough choice that some of those programmers are going to have to make between saying, wow, we could have licensed this stuff out to Netflix with an earlier window and potentially made more money.
Okay.
Ditto. Ditto to that.
Ditto. Okay.
Yeah.
So, just doing it. Okay. Next question. It doesn't come up as much because they haven't really launched yet. Microsoft Smart Glass.
Yes.
What do you guys think of it?
Bullish. I'm bullish. What I love about it is that they're breaking down the barriers between the devices, right? So one of the problems with second screen or some of these things is just there's a lot of friction. Again, the baseline here is TV. It just turned on and it works. There's a lot of friction in the syncing process and the app discovery. There's just a lot of friction. What I like about the Smart Glass approach is that it is complete fluidity. I can have the content there and the second screen here, or the content here, and I can put things wherever I want to, but it's all done in a very seamless and a very easy way. It feels very natural. They have some great built-in widgets that are standardized, so I'll understand how to get actor information or some of those components. And then there's room for the content owner to create a very unique and special and beautiful experience. So I think it's great.
Yeah. I would echo that. The only thing I think about Microsoft that's interesting is as a gateway into the living room with the gaming consoles. If you compare, a lot of people want to create like this highly integrated hardware services model, a la Apple. The one major difference is that most of Apple's products are sort of these Uber everything products, right? And gaming console is tricky because not every American household plays games or even is willing to put their kids in front of games, right? And so I just sort of wonder aloud, is that a rate limiter potentially to their global domination that everyone foresees, right? Sure. It's like, what about the other 50 million American TV homes? Sure. Are they going to go out and buy a game console, or do they want to buy something else?
No, I would say that's fair. I actually think Microsoft's about to be in a much trickier position than it seems. It's, from one perspective, it's very rosy, right? 40 million homes, right? Who are watching it. I mean, Netflix is the #1 app on an Xbox. Right?
They watch a lot of video.
They watch a lot of video, and it's a great platform. I mean, Verizon's already made it their set-top box if you want it to be. So from that angle, it's a very, very rosy world. From the next angle, it's how do you keep selling a 7-year-old hardware device when it's really hard to say that the next-gen hardware platform is going to get adopted. I'd say this is one of the biggest gambles that Microsoft will take is if they actually do what's called an Xbox 720 is a rumor name, in the era of iPads, in the era of I take my games with me wherever I go, right? And I'm very curious to see what happens next there. I think it'll be, as much as I've become a naysayer on Microsoft in recent years, the Xbox side of that company is clearly the vanguard of what they're doing.
Yeah, the interactive entertainment business unit is doing cool things. And for one of the first times, right, Smart Glass is available on iOS, it's on Android, it's on Windows 8. So they're not just locked into the Windows box. I think the big unknown, right, being an Apple fanboy from back in the day is, AirPlay works, right?
Yes,
and everybody's waiting for that other shoe to drop. So can Xbox and Smart Glass get enough traction and consumer adoption before what I think is inevitable that, what comes next from Apple comes out and potentially blows people away, whether it's a giant, it's a mini iPad that's 52 inches wide, or whether it's the next generation.
You're bullish on the TV.
I do think so. I do think that it's going back to single screen.
Apple making a TV? What do you guys think?
I'm still bearish on it. I think all they need to do.
Audience, bullish on Apple. Do you think Apple will make a TV set? If you raise your hand,
everybody's really
Parker,
a believer. I'm with that.
There was, I think, one hand up. Interesting.
But
a year ago, everybody would raise their hands because it was in TechCrunch a lot more back then.
It was. I think all they need to do is just run a Super Bowl spot in the middle of a big weeknight show and make an instructional video that comes out and, says, hi, I'm so-and-so from Apple. Let me just explain something to you. Your phone, okay? Any app, anything to your TV, and just shows,
I mean, I'm actually a big fan of the Apple TV. It's a little brick. It has no fan. It makes no sounds. I tried to use the Xbox to watch Hulu and Netflix, and it has a fan in it, and I just couldn't deal. So I do think they'll make a TV because they can sell it probably for $5,000, but they will also make another Apple TV unit. And I did see actually
we'll debate this one.
Boxy's going to be available in Walmart only 4 or 5 years too late, starting tomorrow. Good for them.
I don't work for them now.
No,
they're very nice people.
They are, Abner, and
all right, we've got about 3 minutes left.
People.
If there is any one last question from the audience, any burning topic we did not hit that you're really hoping we would talk about today, if not, I'll just ask these guys a few more opinions on a couple last things. All right. So in the second screen space, so we talked about the live engagement. I'm going to stay out of Discovery because that's too close to my home, and I don't really want to make this about me, even though our app's awesome. Let's go back a bit more to the Shark Week story for a second and talk about the enhanced content experience. And what I want to do is I want to stay away from whether or not it's live or not, because I think that's too polarizing a topic. I think we can all say we want more content. Right? Has anyone here picked any show and gone to find more content of that show ever? Right? Other than people doing email.
Yeah.
Right? So clearly what you guys are doing is important in that space. How does that world work, in your opinion, when I am using an ABC to Go, Netflix app, et cetera? Because, for example, both of your businesses are predicated on being embedded into those experiences. So if ABC chooses neither of you to do a platform with, where does it all fit together?
So 2 quick things. One, I think that the delivery of related content is moving towards some kind of industry-wide standardization. And I think that the related content becomes a new licensable asset along with the picture and sound that distributors could decide to license or not. It could be a differentiator. It could be a differentiator that they keep internally, why you would watch it on abc.com instead of watching it on Hulu or Netflix. But I do think that the official related content around the shows that we love becomes a new licensable asset, and there'll be standard ways to syndicate that to all platforms.
Randy, any thoughts?
Yeah, so the conflict or the challenge, I think, is that the people who create the shows, who write the shows, the programmers, they want to deliver really special experiences, really deeply embedded and integrated experiences. The Shark Week one, I think, is actually a really good example, and Wing Planet just the week after that or 2 weeks after that, because the content experience was very rich. There were rich infographics. The way it was delivered, like even the sync process was a little shark fin that went across the screen. And Volkswagen, who was the sponsor, to the point of the last panel, I think, they were on early, so it was deeply integrated. So there was a background with the frame of a VW and a shark swimming through it. The content was very integrated with the brand, and the response rates were through the roof on the sponsored content. So the more of that you do, the better. It still remains to be seen how much of that can be delivered through. Agreed that there needs to be standards, but it's the focus of the industry is still on what am I doing in my own apps for my own audience, for my own people. I think that's still where we're at. That's where we started. Very quickly, then it will become how do I let other people consume this content? But we're not quite there yet.
Colin, any last thought on this topic?
Yeah, I don't think I have really. I think I'm a little out of that arena.
All right.
Come on, agree with me, Mia.
Well, then, guys, we're going to hit it right on the button here. And thank you for being a good audience, and thanks for being a great panel.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, it was great.
Nice moderation. Thank you.